Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. In today's tutorial I'm going to be showing you a few tips and techniques for creating the butterfly on this piece here. If you struggle with adding highlights in your work, like you can see the veins in the wings here, and also with blending, because I use wet blending method for this is going to be the one for you. Before we get into this though, I do just want to mention that the full tutorial for the butterfly and the flower is available over on my Patreon. I'm going to leave a link in the description for that for you. First of all, what I'm doing is just making sure that I get the outer edge of the wing in. I'm using a cold grey one, just layering that down and making sure that I get that edge in so I don't lose it. First things first, before we add any other colour down, is to use the white pencil to define the veins and the lines and highlights in the wing. I'm using the Holbein Soft White, but you can use a sharp white hard pencil like the Faber-Castell White and it will do the same job. But with the Holbein Soft White here, what you can see is when I'm layering the blue over the top, you can see that it's acting like a resist. This is because the Holbein Soft White is a really waxy pencil. It won't work quite as well as this if you are using like a firmer pointed white pencil, but it will work in a same kind of way. So I've added in a light layer of the blue over the top and you can see all of those little highlights are starting to pop out. So now I can start to define around them. So that's what I'm starting to do down the bottom and at the top. And the layering process for this, I'm just using really light layers. I'm working from my lighter colours as always through to my darker colours. So I've started off with that initial base layer using a sky blue, which is my lightest blue tone. And then I'm slowly working my way up through light ultramarine, and really lightly and slowly building those layers. So you can see the kind of motion that I'm using with my hand, and the pressure that I'm using with the pencil is extremely light as well. Every so often I am going through and blending a little bit more with the white pencil just to help to smooth everything out and to obtain a little bit of a whiter colour. But as I said at the beginning, I'm going to be using wet blending for this. So I'm going to be using my blender pen to smooth everything out. So before we go through and add our blender pen, you need to make sure that you have lots and lots of layers, because when you do go through and use a wet blending medium, you're going to move all of that pigment around. So you need to make sure that you do have quite a lot of pigment on your paper. If you don't have enough, then you're going to end up with patchy areas and you want to avoid that at all costs. So I'm making sure that I've developed lots and lots of layers. You can see I'm still going in with lots of light layers. I've used some darker colours. I'm coming back over with some lighter colours just to really make sure that the pigment is down on the paper before coming in with the blender pen. The blender pen that I like to use is the Finesse blender pen. I have used Zest-it and other things, but I've found over the years that a blender pen like this, it works really well for me. You can control the amount of fluid going down on the paper, and I like the pen as well because you can kind of control where it's going. You can use a paintbrush with other blending mediums, but I don't know, there's something about the pen that I just really like, so this is the one that I am using here. And you can see that I'm just kind of using some sweeping motions with the pen, just moving everything back and forth, using the pen really lightly as well. And in some areas I am using a little bit of like a circular motion just to help to move everything around so I don't end up getting any patches. One tip as well is to make sure that you don't overwork an area. If you overwork an area, you can also develop little patches and move the pigment around too much. So I'm just making sure that I work on an area once and kind of leave it alone, and then I'm just going to let the whole thing dry. Once the thing is dry, then you can start to develop up your layers some more. In this case, I'm just going back in with my blues, so I'm using my lighter blue tones and then working my way all the way up to those darker blues as well, making sure that I use the darker blues where I have those darker shadows, and I'm also using my darker blues around the highlighted areas. The reason that I'm doing this is when you put light areas, you want to make sure that you put dark areas next to it to provide the maximum contrast and to make sure that they are really standing out. So if you have any highlighted areas, so you can apply this technique to whiskers on cats or any other animal, or highlights within any other animal as well. You want to make sure that you've got your white area and then you put something really dark next to it to provide that maximum contrast. It's going to help to make it stand out, and you can also define it a lot more. You'll see as we complete more layers on this as well that they stand out, but they also I make sure that they blend in as well. The way that I've made them blend in a little bit more is to add a little bit more of the blue tone with a bit of a firmer pressure over the top of that waxy white pencil, and it's created a little bit more of a blue tone rather than a really stark white tone on there. So you can see on this section here that I'm going right next to the white highlight with my darker pencil. So in this case, I'm using a dark indigo pencil. I'm going either side, and then I'm making sure that I don't just leave that kind of stripe of dark. I'm blending it out into the other areas as well. So I've used a firm pressure right next to the highlight, and then as I'm coming out into the lighter areas, I'm making sure that I lift the pressure off the pencil so that that darker area blends in a bit more. I'm also going back over those darker areas with my lighter tones to help to, 1, add more layers, and 2, it's going to help to blend everything together. So you can see I'm using a lighter pencil over the areas here, going back in with some darker areas, darker colours as well, just to really try and help build those layers, blend everything in. I'm trying to get everything looking really, really smooth. I'm also making sure for shadows and everything like that that I'm just using blue tones or similar colours, so bluey purple tones. So I'm not going in with any kind of browns to create the shadows. I find that when you have bright colours like this and then you introduce like a dark sepia or a brown to create the shadow, you kind of muddy the colours a little bit, and it creates not a very vibrant looking shadow. So I'm making sure that I'm using similar colours, so purples and blues, to help to create the shadows. On the outer edge of the wing, where we do have this really dark line that edges the blue from the kind of really pale bluey grey of the edge, I'm using a sharp dark indigo pencil, and I'm making sure that I come in and I add any kind of little nuances. So on butterfly wings, you often got these little dark sections that come and follow down the veins of the wing and all of that. So I'm making sure that I add all of those in and blend the outer edge so it's not just so stark next to the other colours as well. For this particular piece, I have added little tiny dots of white gel pen. I've added this in because it adds a little bit of sparkle, and I think it just really helps the butterfly wing. I don't leave the gel pen as white and stark as it comes out like this. I put all of the little bits that I want to add on, so coming around the veins, like identifying little pieces and adding in any kind of like pieces of the fluffy body that I can see overhanging, and any highlights that I want to add. I'm adding them all in. I'm going to let the gel pen dry, and then I'm going to go over the top of those a little bit later on with a blue pencil to really tone them down so they won't be as bright and bold as you're seeing them right this second. This is a really fun technique that I do like to add to a lot of my pieces nowadays, because I just think it adds a little something extra, and you can get those really white highlights that you're really looking for. And in the case of this, once I've added in the blue over the top, I just feel that it adds that kind of dusty effect that you often see on butterfly wings. I don't know, I find it really adds something a little extra as well. For the lower half of the wing, I'm following the exact same steps. So I've gone in with my white pencil and I've created that kind of wax resist, and then I've added in my lighter layers, and then I'm building up in the darker areas the darker colours, and then following that through the rest of the wing as well. So in this particular area it was really dark towards the body, and then also on the outer edge of the wing as well, and then the very centre was slightly lighter. So I'm trying to concentrate the darker colours in those areas where I can see on the reference photo that the shadow or colour is darker. I'll do the same on this wing as well, come in with a blender pen and blend it all through. But you can see that I'm adding in the blue on the gel pen highlights that I added, and it tones them down a little bit so they're not quite in your face and they're not quite, bright and distracting. They kind of blend in a little bit more with the wing. So you can see here I'm just coming in and adding in some small details into the butterfly wing on the lower half. As I said before, I'm adding in like colours, so blues and purples, so really creating a nice mixture of those. I find that if you have something blue, it's often really good to add in something purple or some purple tones so that it's not quite just blue. If you're adding in a little bit of purple, it just adds a little bit more interest to the blue tones that are going on. Coming into the butterfly body, the body is really fluffy, so we're using a little bit of a different technique. So we're using lines, so using a bit more of a fur method. I'm going to leave a video in the description for you if you want to follow my fur method. It's just using tapered lines and making sure that we're following the direction of the body and making sure we're grouping them quite close together as well to create a really dense fluffy area. You also want to work in the opposite direction of the fluff so that you can get a really nice natural look. I find that if you just add the strokes going in one direction, so in the direction that the fluff is going, it looks a little bit contrived and it can look a little bit unnatural. So I like to make sure that I add some lines going in the opposite direction to help counteract that. I'm also using my white pencil to help to add some highlights coming over and into the wings of the butterfly there. It just really helps to define that fluffy body. For the rest of the butterfly here, I'm just adding in his antennae, so I've just used some cold grey 1 and I'm using some of my dark indigo to help to create that kind of zebra-like black and white checkered effect on the little antennae there. And then the underside of the body, again, is nice and fluffy, so we're using the same technique of using some fur lines, grouping them close together and following the direction of the body as well, and then going in and creating the shadows and getting a little bit of a darker colour on the underside. The underside of this particular butterfly was a little bit lighter than the rest, so I'm just using some really light pressured blue strokes and then coming in and really defining my shadows with some dark indigo and mainly filling in the shadows with that. I'm also making sure that the pencil strokes that I use are really short, because if I was to use quite long ones he'd look overly fluffy, so I'm really trying to make sure that I do use some shorter lines, especially when it comes to doing the shadows, because if you add in long lines when you're doing the shadows, then your shadow's going to be really long, so you want to make sure that you're kind of making sure you limit the strokes that you're using for different parts of the body. So the main body, they can be slightly longer, in the shadows they need to be a little bit shorter so that you can create some shorter shadows and they look more natural. For the legs, I'm just making sure that I map out the shape of them with a lighter colour and then coming straight in with some darker tones, adding in a little bit of a blue base into those legs as well, but mainly just coming in with some darker tones to add the shadows. As I say, just making sure that I use kind of like little dots and pinpricks of pressure with the point of the pencil to just create some really delicate shadows and details on there. And again, working in the opposite direction for the fluff, so that I can create a little bit of an overlay and a little bit more of a natural look. And that is our butterfly complete. So just a few little tips and tricks for you to use if you're creating something similar, if you're creating smooth wings. I do like the addition of the gel pen. I really do feel like it adds a little bit extra. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, whether you agree or whether you would actually leave it out. But I really hope that you enjoyed this tutorial and that you can take something from it and apply it to your own work, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Bye.